After our discussion on acute inflammation, we are now going to deal with the other type of inflammation, briefly about which we had spoken right in the beginning of the chapter, and that is chronic inflammation. So there are few points about chronic inflammation that we have already discussed right in the beginning. So let's quickly revise those points first. We had discussed that as the name suggests, chronic. That is something, I hope you can recall, will have a delayed onset. It will have a delayed onset. And as we remember, acute inflammation had an early or a sudden onset. The next difference between acute and chronic inflammation that we had studied was the duration for which it goes on. So again, just by simple English, chronic inflammation, chronic is something or chronicity is something that will go on for a very long time. So this is going to have a prolonged course. This is going to be prolonged or long-lived. So first, it will start off late, delayed onset. Second, it is going to go on for a very long period of time. It is long-lived or prolonged. The next point that we have again already discussed earlier, what was the cell of chronic inflammation? And I hope everyone can recall that the cell of chronic inflammation, or the cells in fact, were the lymphocytes and the monocytes. Lymphocytes and the monocytes. Now these were the two main cells of chronic inflammation. Before we proceed and complete this particular definition, I just want to take you back and make you revise that we had discussed this particular thing when we were discussing acute inflammation. We have done these different types of cells and how they appear microscopically. So the cells that I want you to focus on right now are these two. One was a lymphocyte, and I told you that a normal looking cell with a central nucleus, no abnormality, would be a lymphocyte. The next cell that we see over here is a monocyte. And what was the catch point of a monocyte? How are we going to identify a monocyte? So if we zoom in to this image, monocyte was the one that was having a kidney shaped or a reniform nucleus. So kidney, renal, that is how we had remembered. Kidney shaped or a reniform nucleus is the one that is seen in a monocyte. So these are the two main cells that we have in chronic inflammation. Also, what I want you to recall is till the time monocyte is present in the blood, we are going to call it a monocyte. But if the same cell comes out into a tissue, now the terminology, I hope you can recall, changes. It is now known as a macrophage. So macrophage and monocytes, we had remembered, were synonyms. Only the location was different. Monocyte was in the blood and macrophage is in the tissue. So students, we've done two very important aspects of chronic inflammation. The first is the duration. The second aspect that we've done are the cells. But the definition, which most students tend to leave over here, is incorrect, because there is one more aspect that should be added onto this. That yes, this is an inflammation which will go on for a very long time, which will have lymphocytes, which will have monocytes, but after the inflammation is over, this will be associated with healing and repair. Healing and repair. Now this is one very important aspect, students, because whatever damage inflammation had done because of the cells, because of the enzymes, because of the organism itself, whatever damage had occurred onto the body, our body also takes the initiative of repairing that particular damage. So this is that part of chronic inflammation definition that is ignored, but it is very important for your conceptual understanding. Now, once we've dealt with a basic outline of what is chronic inflammation, let's go into a more MCQ based approach. In this particular definition, if a question comes, which is the most important cell of chronic inflammation? So let's take up one MCQ based question. which is the most important cell of chronic inflammation? So remember, we were dealing mainly with two cells, that is lymphocytes and monocytes, or you can say macrophages. So out of these two, please remember that the answer to this question will be a macrophage. The answer will be a macrophage. This, students, is the most important cell of chronic inflammation, and because it is most important, we are going to do it and deal with it in a more greater detail. So we are going to deal with it starting right from its origin to where all can it be present in the body and what are the functions that it carries. So let's begin about this particular cell, talking about a macrophage. Where does it arise from? And partly you know this answer because we just did that macrophage has come out in the tissue. So let's try to deal with this in a backward manner. So for example, if I say that a macrophage has come out in the tissue, what was the cell that was there in the blood? That was a monocyte. So everyone is well versed with this concept now. When a monocyte escapes the blood and comes out into the tissue, we call it a macrophage. So we are going backward. Macrophage is nothing but the cell that has moved out from the blood vessel into the tissue. That is a monocyte. Where does a monocyte come from? Monocyte is a derivative of monoblast. Monoblast. Now this is the precursor of a monocyte, and precursor, students, just for your understanding for the rest of the subject, you should know that precursor forms of all the cells are present in the bone marrow. So now we can deal with it in the forward direction. In the bone marrow, there was a monoblast that formed a mature cell in the blood, that is a monocyte. That cell comes out into the tissue, forms a macrophage. This is the basic origin of this particular cell. Now, once a macrophage is formed, although the general term is a macrophage, but this is one particular cell which carries a lot of fancy terms. That is, in every tissue of the body, this carries a different fancy name. And whenever there are fancy names involved in pathology, those tend to become favorite MCQs with the examiners. So now let's make a list of all the macrophages in the body that you need to know. When a macrophage is present in the first example, let's say in the brain. In the brain, the macrophage is referred to as a microglial cell. Microglial cell. Then, when it is present in the lungs, this is a slightly easier name. It is a macrophage. When present in the lungs, we will call it an alveolar macrophage. Alveolar macrophage. Next, coming down onto the abdomen, let's say in the liver. This is one of those names which mostly students are well versed with, that when a macrophage is present in the liver, we call it a Kupffer cell. A Kupffer cell is nothing but a macrophage, only the location has changed, it is in the liver. Sticking onto the abdomen only, what is the macrophage known as in the spleen? This is a recent favorite now. In the spleen, it is known as a littoral cell. Again, more organs of the abdomen. Moving on to the kidneys. In the kidney, everyone is well versed with the structure of a glomerulus, and a glomerulus has one cell known as the mesangial cell. So students, mesangial cell is nothing but a macrophage of the kidney. So this is the same cell we are talking about, only the organ is changing. As the organ changes, the name of this macrophage changes, but essentially everything remains the same else about it. Okay, further moving on, this particular cell has also got a different name in the placenta, where it is known as a Hofbauer cell. Again, a slightly difficult name, so more chances of getting it in the examination. Hofbauer cell in the placenta. The list is not complete yet. This particular cell in the connective tissue, is given a simple name of a histiocyte. Next, going on to the bone. In the bone, the same cell is given the name of an osteoclast. Now everyone is aware of osteoclast as a cell in the bone. Osteoclast basically has bone breaking properties. It is going to dissolve or break the bone. That particular cell, or you can say it is going to eat up the bone. What is the main function of a macrophage that we have already studied in acute inflammation? It is eating up, phagocytosis. So osteoclast is a bone eating or a bone dissolving cell. So it becomes a macrophage. It is essentially a macrophage. Lastly, in the synovial cavity or in the synovium, the same cell, again one of the simpler ones, is known as the type A synovial cells. So in the synovium, type A synovial cells. So students, this is a list which is extremely important and one of the favorite lists with the examiners that we have, where a macrophage is given different terminologies in different organs. A recent question that has come up, which I put up in the end purposely, is out of this, the simplest one to remember that I was telling you in the beginning was lungs. Because in the lungs we have alveoli. So in the alveoli, the macrophage will be termed as an alveolar macrophage. But students, this, since it was so simple and the examiners were not liking it so simple, they decided to complicate this or add a further fancy name to it. Therefore, in the lungs, the same cell is also known as the dust cells. So we inhale all the dust, and that is how you can remember the dust enters our lungs. So these cells are known as the dust cells. So students, the most important cell of chronic inflammation was a macrophage, which is nothing but a precursor of a monocyte from the blood. This macrophage will have varied names in varied organs. Moving ahead, there is a very important topic as to how many types of macrophages do we have. What are the types of macrophages? Now M for macrophage, so the types have been divided into two, and these include M1 and M2. These include M1 and M2. So for example, this is the macrophage, this is an M1 macrophage. What will activate this macrophage? There will be some mediators which will activate this macrophage. And finally, what will this macrophage secrete? What are its cytokines or what are its secretions? So that is how we are going to remember. This particular, the M1 category, is activated by interferon gamma. I hope you can recall interferon gamma was under the category of cytokines, which we had studied. Interferon gamma activates M1, and this in turn releases interleukin 1, interleukin 2, and then combine 1 and 2, that is interleukin 12. 1, 2, combine the two, 12. So interferon gamma will activate it. This macrophage will then release interleukin 1, 2 and 12. Similarly, let's see what do we need to know about M2. So students, M2 is going to be activated by interleukin 4 and interleukin 5. Interleukin 4 and 5. And M2 in turn releases two mediators which you should be able to recall as to which category we had read it under, that is interleukin 10 and TGF beta. And I hope you can recall which category we read it in, because that is the next set of difference that we have. If you can remember by now, this interleukin 10 and TGF-beta were very important anti-inflammatory cytokines. Remember, they were anti-inflammatory cytokines. So now you already know that if these were anti-inflammatory cytokines, what becomes the function of M2? Correct. The function of M2, if you have to do the differences of the function between these two, the function of M2 becomes anti-inflammatory. Anti-inflammatory. On the other hand, M1, which is releasing the regular interleukins and the cytokines which are going to promote inflammation, the function of that becomes pro-inflammatory. Pro-inflammatory. So students, this is a summary of macrophages, M1, M2. M1 is going to be pro-inflammatory, that is the most important action you need to remember. And M2 is going to have an anti-inflammatory action. If you remember M2 had an anti-inflammatory action, you will remember the cytokines it is releasing, because the anti-inflammatory cytokines were interleukin 10 and TGF-beta. Before we finish this discussion, there are two additional MCQs, just one-liners that you need to know. We just discussed that the two cells of chronic inflammation are lymphocytes and macrophages. So again, we are going to do just a question on these two, lymphocytes and macrophages. And the question that has come is on the lifespan of these. So what is the lifespan of these particular cells? Of a lymphocyte is a very large or a very varied lifespan, varying from 2 weeks up till 2 years. So lymphocytes can be alive between 2 weeks up till 2 years. That is the large lifespan of a lymphocyte. Macrophages, on the other hand, have a lifespan of usually 1 to 3 days. 1 to 3 days. So these were the two important cells, lymphocytes and macrophages. And I hope you can recall that we did a cell earlier on of acute inflammation also. That was the neutrophil. And we had also discussed the lifespan of a neutrophil, which was 6 hours. So neutrophil, 6 hours, lymphocyte, 2 weeks to 2 years, and macrophage, 1 to 3 days. Now that we've got a basic of chronic inflammation, there is one subtype of chronic inflammation that needs to be discussed. And that particular subtype is referred to as granulomatous inflammation. Granulomatous inflammation. So the first question about this I have already told you. Is it a subtype of acute inflammation or chronic inflammation? So you can answer that now, that this is a subtype of chronic inflammation. So what is so specific about it that it has been categorized as a separate entity? That is in the name. So focus on the name. The name is granulomatous inflammation. So this means it has something to do with granulomas. This inflammation shows formation of granuloma. Granuloma formation is going to be noted. So this is a subtype of chronic inflammation. Granuloma formation is going to be noted. Now students, this brings us to the next question that should automatically come to your mind. What is a granuloma? Okay, so granuloma is not some 1 or 2 cells. It is actually a combination of a lot of cells that we are going to now first draw. So we'll draw it out ourselves. We'll make a schematic diagram. After that, we are going to go and see actual pictures of all the diagrams that we draw. So first and foremost, what do we mean by a granuloma? So let's see. These are cells. A granuloma will comprise of these cells, and these are nothing but the macrophages. Remember, the most important cell was a macrophage. So the first component of a granuloma that we are dealing with is a macrophage. So this is simple. This is the most important cell of chronic inflammation, and granulomatous inflammation is nothing but a subtype of chronic inflammation. So these two will go hand in hand. Now what additional do we need to know? The same macrophage is also going to get certain modifications. When a macrophage becomes modified, I will call it a modified macrophage. So the next component becomes a modified macrophage. Modified macrophage. And a modified macrophage has been given a specific name, that is epithelioid cell. Number of high yield points that we need to pick up over here. Let's take them up one at a time. Main difference between how I'm going to draw a macrophage and a modified macrophage. Macrophage, you know, I've already drawn. In a modified macrophage, I'm going to change the shape of this nucleus. So now, as you can see, the nucleus is going to become slightly elongated, or this is given a fancy name, that is, it is a slipper-shaped nucleus. Slipper-shaped nucleus. Very important point, students. Macrophage will have a round nucleus. Modification when happens, modified macrophage will have a slipper-shaped or an elongated nucleus, and the other name for a modified macrophage will be an epithelioid cell. Two more questions that we need to discuss over here. What is the modification that has happened? Why are we calling it a modified macrophage? Remember, what was the function of a macrophage? The function of a macrophage was phagocytosis. Phagocytosis, eating up of the organism, of anything that the body wants to get rid of, eating up. The modification has happened in the function. A modified macrophage is not phagocytic in function. Instead, a modified macrophage is going to have a secretory function. A modified macrophage will have a secretory function. So students, two important differences: macrophage and modified macrophage. Which of these will have a slipper-shaped nucleus? I hope you know by now it is a modified macrophage. And what is the modification in the function? That instead of having a phagocytic property like a classical macrophage, it is going to have a secretory activity. The next high yield point that you need to know, I told you that the other name is an epithelioid cell. Now please do not confuse an epithelioid cell with an epithelial cell. This is not an epithelial cell. Epithelial cell is separate. Epithelioid cell is separate. Epithelial cell is something that we see, for example, in the skin. The lining is made up of an epithelium. That is on the surface. Anywhere you have a lining, that is an epithelium. So you can say epithelium is something that is resting on a basement membrane, like in the skin. Anywhere else, for example, in the GI tract, so it is resting on a basement membrane. But an epithelioid cell has nothing to do with the lining. Epithelioid cell was nothing but a modified macrophage. So do not confuse the two terms. Epithelial is different, epithelioid is different. Now coming back, first component macrophage, second component modified macrophage. What next? All these macrophages can then fuse. They can then fuse and form these large cells. First thing you've noticed, I've made the size of this cell extremely large. Number one. Second, I'm saying that multiple macrophages are going to fuse together. So if many cells fuse together, their nuclei will also fuse together. So all the nuclei of all those cells are now present here. So all the cells have fused together and formed these particular cells. What do we call this cell? That is the third component. What is the size? Large, giant. How many nuclei does it have? Multiple. So I will call it a multinucleated giant cell. I will call it a multinucleated giant cell. So you know by the name, giant means large cell, because it has multiple nuclei, multinucleated. And why does it have multiple nuclei? Because this is formed from the fusion of macrophages. Right? So we've done 3 important components up till now. Now let's see what is the next component. Surrounding this entire granuloma or whatever components we have drawn, I am now going to make number of these cells which I am going to surround the entire granuloma with. All throughout the granuloma, I am going to surround it with these particular cells. What is this entire? So if this is a granuloma, it is going to cover it, or you can say it is like a collar which is going to enclose the entire granuloma, and this then happens to be the 4th component. This is nothing but the lymphocytes. Remember, granuloma was a chronic inflammation. Chronic inflammation has 2 main cells, lymphocyte and macrophages. Macrophages we've spoken about. The lymphocytes come over here, that is, they are going to form, and remember this term because it is very important, they are going to form a collar around all the cells. Sometimes, students, these lymphocytes can also be associated with plasma cells. So plasma cells also may be present in there, a mixture of lymphocytes and plasma cells. So now we've done these 4 components and I want you to revise. Macrophage. When a macrophage gets modified macrophage. Other name is epithelioid cell, slipper-shaped nucleus, not an epithelial cell. All of these cells fuse, they form a large cell, that is a multinucleated giant cell. Surrounding all of this, we have a collar of which cells predominantly? Lymphocytes. Now, all throughout, I have left the center of this particular granuloma empty. So, this particular area that we have over here sometimes can have something known as necrosis. That is the 5th point, students, that you need to know over here. The 5th point, necrosis, again, remember, can be present or may not be present. So it is not mandatory that necrosis will be present always. But when it is present, we are talking about caseous necrosis. So if I am saying that this can either be present or it can be absent. What do I mean? Because the terminology will change. If I say that there is a granuloma and it has caseous necrosis, the examiner will give you a question of a caseating granuloma. If the examiner says that the granuloma does not have caseous necrosis, the terminology used will be non-caseating granuloma. So these are the 5 main components that you need to know. Necrosis, which is the 5th component, remember, may or may not be present. If present, caseating granuloma. If absent, non-caseating granuloma. And why I am emphasizing on this? Because there are separate categories of examples that you need to know, which are again very favorite one-liner questions with the examiners. Before we go on to those types, there is one category or one particular cell that I want to talk in detail about. Again, something which is very high yield. I told you about that large giant cell, multinucleated giant cell. So something about this cell, many images in fact, you need to know over here. So let's take this up in detail. let's study about multinucleated giant cells. Now first let's classify these giant cells, and once we've classified them, we'll make a diagrammatic representation. Once we've done that, we'll get back and we will see all the different types of images that we need to see. The first thing that you need to know, multinucleated giant cells are categorized into two. Remember that multinucleated giant cells are just not present in any pathology. They can also be seen normally in our body. So what will I call them? I will call them physiological giant cells. Physiological giant cells. When they are seen in a disease, I will call it a pathological giant cell. So first, let's quickly do the shorter list, that is of physiological giant cell. Where all in the body are they normally seen? And these are three locations. First, remember the osteoclast. And I hope you remember, where is the osteoclast present? In the bone. That is normally present in the body, so it becomes a physiological cell. What I am adding to the knowledge is that it is a physiological giant cell. Multinucleated giant cell. From the bone, move on to the bone marrow. In the bone marrow, we have a cell known as megakaryocyte. Megakaryocyte. And I hope you know this, or we are probably adding on to the knowledge of some. Megakaryocyte that is present in the bone marrow is a precursor of which blood element? This later on forms platelets. So when we go to hematology, students, the first thing about platelets that you will be doing will be that the precursor of platelets in the bone marrow is a megakaryocyte. And out there, what you need to recall from this chapter is that a megakaryocyte is a multinucleated giant cell and normally present in the body, so it is of the physiological categorization. Lastly, in this list, we are going to have syncytiotropoblast. Syncytiotropoblast. And this makes us slightly linked to obstetrics as well. Syncytiotropoblast is a cell that is seen in the placenta during placenta development. So we have three cells. In the bone, osteoclast. In the bone marrow, we have megakaryocyte. And in the placenta, we have syncytiotropoblast. Remember, all three of these are physiological. Now let's come to the actual category, pathological giant cells, on which a lot of images are also to be done. Pathological giant cell, let's take the first example, which is actually a very important example when we are talking about the Indian scenario. The name of this giant cell is the Langerhans giant cell. Langerhans giant cell. Now, what do we need to know first? What are we going to do? We are going to make a diagram ourselves, understand the location of everything in this particular cell, and then we'll see actual microscopic images. First of all, if this is a particular giant cell, Langerhans giant cell is going to have nuclei which are arranged right at the periphery, like this. So right at the periphery, the nuclei are arranged. This particular arrangement, students, is known as the horseshoe shape arrangement. Horseshoe shape arrangement of the nuclei. Arrangement of nuclei. Every giant cell will have this one catch point which will help you in differentiating it from the rest of the giant cells. So this is that catch point over here. When you see these nuclei which are arranged in this horseshoe shaped manner, they are talking about a Langerhans giant cell. And right in the beginning, I told you This is very important in the Indian scenario because this particular giant cell is seen in tuberculosis, a very common disease and infection in our country. Tuberculosis shows presence of Langerhans type of giant cell, horseshoe shape arrangement. One more collateral knowledge that I want to link over here. Remember please, the name is a Langerhans. Later on when we go with further chapters to immunology and so on, we will come across a term that is known as Langerhans. Langerhans cell. Now that is Langerhans, this is Langerhans. Please note the difference. Langerhans cell has nothing to do with giant cells. Langerhans cell is nothing but an APC, antigen presenting cell, or you can say a dendritic cell. Dendritic cells are actually antigen presenting cells. They present the antigen to our body. When some antigen comes from outside, these cells present the antigen to the immune cells of our body. That is why we call them antigen presenting cells. Very important cells that we will be discussing in immunology. Remember, these are present in the skin. So these are totally different. These are Langerhans cells, APCs of the skin or dendritic cells in the skin. What I want you to come back now to is Langerhans giant cell. Please note Langerhans. Now students, before we go on to the next type, let's quickly see an image of an actual Langerhans giant cell, and I hope you can recall now this large cell that you see over here. Large cell, this is one cell, and what you can appreciate, all the nuclei are arranged right at the periphery. We will call it a horseshoe shape arrangement. So if you see such a large cell with horseshoe shape arrangement of the nuclei, we are going to label it as a Langerhans giant cell. Again, I'll draw it out for you. This is the horseshoe shape arrangement. Very important cell seen in tuberculosis. Getting back, the second cell that we need to do in this category is known as the Touton giant cell. Same approach, we are first going to make a schematic diagram, understand what is happening here. Giant cell means I'm going to draw a large cell which is going to be multinucleated. So I'm going to draw multiple nuclei. But what is the catch point of this particular cell? This particular cell is going to have vacuoles. So just surrounding these, there are going to be large vacuoles that are present. So the way of identifying a Touton giant cell is going to be vacuolated cytoplasm. Vacuolated cytoplasm. That is the way we are going to identify. So nuclei anywhere in the center, nothing particular, but vacuoles in the cytoplasm, what should strike you? Touton giant cell. If you know what is there in these vacuoles, you will know the disease automatically. These vacuoles contain nothing but lipid, or you can say fat. That is why these are seen in diseases such as xanthoma. So two things, vacuolated cytoplasm. Why vacuolated? Because it has fat or lipid. And the disease in which it will be seen will be something to do with a lipid disorder, that is xanthoma, or what you also know as xanthogranulomatous inflammation. Now let's see an actual image of a Touton giant cell. So over here I hope everyone can appreciate multiple of these cells that we can see. Large cells or giant cells. All of them have multiple nuclei inside them. I can count many nuclei. And if I zoom in, you will appreciate that there is a vacuolated cytoplasm that is present around these nuclei. So when you're seeing these vacuoles or a bubble or a vacuole, you should first think of a Touton giant cell. you should think of a two-tone giant cell. And once you've thought of two-tone giant cell, your option becomes clear. You are going to mark xanthoma or a lipid disorder. Coming back, the third type that we are going to now draw out is referred to as a foreign body type of giant cell. Foreign body type of giant cell. Now let's first draw this out and then we'll do other details about it. A large cell. Simplest to remember because in this you have nothing peculiar. There are going to be multiple nuclei that are present and there is no proper distribution of those nuclei. This haphazard arrangement of the nuclei, this haphazard nuclear arrangement is actually the catch point of this particular giant cell. So when you see a giant cell which has haphazardly arranged nuclei, we are talking about a foreign body giant cell, right? Now, when will this type of a giant cell be seen in our body? We are talking about pathological giant cells, so we have to talk about some disease or pathology. This is the simplest because it has it in the name itself. Foreign body. For example, this can be seen due to talc. Now you would ask me, when would talc or powder or talc enter our body? Why would talc or powder enter our body? So very commonly during surgeries, the gloves that are used, the surgical gloves, on the inner aspect, they have talc. If that talc from the surgeon's hands enters and stays in the body of the patient, later on it will act as a foreign body. The body is not used to talc, so it will treat it as a foreign body. And what type of giant cell will it form against the foreign body? Simple, foreign body giant cell. Let's take another example. For example, sutures. So now if stitches or sutures are put which are non-absorbable, suture again, if some suture enters or is retained in the body, if it is non-absorbable, the body will treat it as a foreign material. What type of giant cell? Foreign body giant cell. So these are important examples that you need to know. With this basis, this is the actual image that you need to deal with. So this one large cell over here, and the best part about identification is that there is no particular identifying point. There is just a haphazard arrangement. The nuclei are haphazardly arranged. This becomes a foreign body giant cell. Foreign body giant cell. So I hope these three particular giant cells are clear up till now. One was the Langhans. Langhans had horseshoe arrangement seen in tuberculosis. Second is two-tone. Two-tone has vacuolated cytoplasm because of lipid seen in xanthomas. Third is foreign body giant cell, which is seen in obviously foreign bodies, and the catch point is there is no catch point, that is haphazard arrangement. Moving on to the fourth category. This is something known, this has a rather fancy name. It is known as the Worden-Finkelday giant cell. Worden-Finkelday giant cell. Now, what is so special about this? So first again, let's draw a large cell, that is a giant cell. Again in this, the nuclei that we have are going to be multiple, no peculiar arrangement as such. But within these nuclei, we are going to have certain inclusions. Within the nuclei, there are going to be inclusions. So these inclusions are a characteristic feature. These inclusions are a characteristic feature that we have for the Worden-Finkelday giant cell. So you have a giant cell which has all haphazard arranged nuclei. Start thinking of two things. One, foreign body. Second, Worden-Finkelday. Closely observe the nuclei. Do you see something inside the nucleus? Do you see an inclusion? If yes, you know it is not a foreign body giant cell, it is a Worden-Finkelday giant cell. And the only disease which you need to know, or the infection where this particular type of giant cell is seen is measles. A very important question that is also asked in microbiology. Measles shows which type of giant cell, that is Worden-Finkelday type of giant cell. Similarly, let's see the image of this. You can appreciate there is one large cell over here, so it has to be a giant cell which has multiple nuclei. No peculiar arrangement, but within the nuclei you can appreciate there are these inclusions that are present. These inclusions that you see, there are multiple inclusions that you see. These are going to then make it a Worden-Finkelday giant cell. Worden-Finkelday giant cell. So nuclei having multiple inclusions. Very important catch point of this particular giant cell. The last in this category that we have, the fifth type of giant cell that we have, is referred to as the tumor giant cell. So it is going to be a giant cell. That is exactly what I'm going to draw. Will be seen in some particular tumor, that is why they've called it a tumor giant cell. So let's see this giant cell first, and probably you already know which tumor you would see it in. So this is a large cell, a giant cell. And the nuclei have this very important feature. There will be these two nuclei that you see. Inside these nuclei, you will see two very prominent nucleoli. So what are the features that we've done? This is going to be a giant cell. This is going to have these nuclei, and if I draw a line through and through, can you appreciate that these are similar looking? Both the nuclei are exactly similar. So I will call this a mirror image nuclei. These are mirror image nuclei. Completely similar looking. These are mirror image. And what do we have inside of these? The third thing, that is prominent, a very prominent or a glaring nucleoli. So a giant cell with mirror image nuclei and a glaring or a prominent nucleoli. Students, this cell, very favorite with the examiners, this is known as the Reed-Sternberg cell. This is the Reed-Sternberg cell, and very commonly it will be abbreviated as the RS cell. Reed-Sternberg cell, named after the scientists who discovered it, Reed and Sternberg. Now, once you know this, I told you this is an example of a tumor giant cell. So you need to know that this particular tumor giant, which is the tumor in which this particular giant cell is going to be seen. And remember, this is seen in Hodgkin's lymphoma. A very important concept that you've done over here, because this will be dealt with in great detail when we move on to Hodgkin's lymphoma under hematology. For the time being, you need to know Reed-Sternberg cells are a type of pathological giant cells showing mirror image nuclei and seen in Hodgkin's lymphoma. There is another name that is given to these Reed-Sternberg cells, which I will come back after we see an actual image of a Reed-Sternberg cell. This is what a Reed-Sternberg cell looks like, this large cell that you see over here. If you remember your diagram, you are clear over here. There are these two nuclei which are identical, mirror image nuclei, and right in the center I am having these glaring. They are glaring at us, so these are very prominent nucleoli. This is a Reed-Sternberg cell or an RS cell. Now look carefully, and the term that I will give you a very striking similarity. This particular cell is said to have an owl eye appearance. Because of this particular appearance of these glaring nucleoli in these mirror image nuclei, it is said to have an owl eye appearance. A very important question. So there are these three questions that you have derived from this RS cell. First, it is a type of a tumor giant cell. Second, The appearance is said to be owl eye appearance. And third, it is seen in which tumor? It is seen in Hodgkin's lymphoma. So now students, getting back, we were discussing granuloma. In granulomas, we discussed all the different components, and I discussed then in detail about these multinucleated giant cells. Once you formed a basis or a concept of what exactly a granuloma is, next we need to move on and do certain examples of granulomas. Next we need to know the different examples and the types of a granuloma. So if we have to classify granuloma, or you can say classification of granulomas on the basis of the etiology, that is, are they being caused because of some infection or are they being caused otherwise? So on the same basis, I can categorize granulomas into either of infective etiology or of non-infective etiology or of non-infective etiology. What are the examples under these various headings with important images that you need to know? First, let's deal with infections. The first and the most important in the Indian setup and the scenario is tuberculosis. Tuberculosis, whenever there is a granuloma seen in a slide microscopically, in the Indian setting, the first thing that comes to every pathologist's mind, histopathologist's mind, is tuberculosis. That is how commonly it is seen. So tuberculosis is the first infection that you need to know. The second example that you need to know is that this can also be seen in syphilis. Third, granulomas can be seen in leprosy. Fourth, granulomas can be seen in cat scratch disease. They can be seen in cat scratch disease. Fifth, they can be seen in malaria. Sixth, they can be seen in Q fever. Seventh, they can be seen in histoplasmosis. Also blastomyces and coccidioidomycosis. Now definitely initially sounds as an extremely lengthy and exhaustive list, but as we discuss each one of these and interesting points about each will come up, this will simplify for sure. So let's take this list in the same manner. First we had tuberculosis. Now over here I just want you to probably revise the first initial chapter, that is cell injury, where we had discussed necrosis. And if you remember, in tuberculosis there is a very characteristic necrosis that is seen, that is known as caseous necrosis. The granuloma of tuberculosis also shows caseous necrosis. Therefore, a granuloma of TB is said to be a caseating granuloma. It is said to be a caseating granuloma. One thing I want you to memorize and make it as a concept is, wherever you come across caseating granuloma, you are going to associate tuberculosis with it. But can tuberculosis show non-caseating granulomas as well? The answer is yes. But remember, the chances of a caseating granuloma are much, much higher than a non-caseating granuloma. So the best answer, yes, it can show both, but which is more common? It is a caseating granuloma. Next we have syphilis. In syphilis, all that you need to know is that this particular thing is given a name known as gamma. It is given a name that is gamma. Coming to leprosy, remember which form of leprosy tends to show more of granulomas? The tuberculoid form. it has the word tubercle, so tuberculosis is what you should get reminded of, but it is actually a leprosy. But why tuberculoid? Because it can show granulomas. Just like TB shows granulomas, tuberculoid leprosy will also show granulomas. Before we proceed on to the unusual type of infections, let's finish off one very important image-based question over here. What is this particular image? One thing that is put up very commonly in most of the exams. What you see in the center, if I just zoom in, right in the center over here, can you appreciate any cell, any outline or any nucleus, anything? No. This means this is just pink color material in the center. Cell death has happened. There is no cell present, just pink color material. This is the caseous necrosis. This is the caseous necrosis. So we are going in terms of a caseating granuloma. But first thing at the outset, once you were given this image, what led you to think that this is a granuloma? So let's see other parameters also. What my advice to you would be, how to identify a granuloma. See the most striking thing, something that glares at you from that image. Obviously something that will have a very giant size. The cell that will be extremely giant will be very characteristic. So focus on such cells. If you see this cell and if you see this another cell, this one over here, they are giant cells. You can see them right as soon as you see this image, the first thing that your eyes go on to will be this. So this becomes your catch point for the image. This is the multinucleated giant cell. So we've got central necrosis, we've got a giant cell. Now if you see, there are these elongated cells that are present. These cells which have an elongated nucleus. Or I can say a slipper shaped nucleus, and I hope you can recall that when I'm calling it an elongated cell or a slipper shaped nucleus, I am talking about an epithelioid cell. I'm talking about an epithelioid cell. What was an epithelioid cell? It was a modified macrophage. I hope you remember it was a modified macrophage. And lastly, if you see this particular collar over here, so let's take this up with a different color for better understanding. If you see this entire blue color collar over here that is surrounding this granuloma over here, this then happens to be the lymphocytes. So remember, we had discussed that the granuloma will be covered all around by a lymphocytic collar. This is that lymphocytic collar. So now try to correlate this particular image with the diagrammatic representation that we had made earlier. That was this image. Center had necrosis. Then we had slipper-shaped nuclei, epithelioid cells, giant cells and lymphocytic collar. So the same schematic diagram now you have to fit into this particular diagram. Central necrosis, then we have giant cells, then we have slipper-shaped cells, that is the epithelioid cells, and then we have the lymphocytic collar. Because this particular granuloma has caseous necrosis, I will call it a caseating granuloma. Caseating granuloma. And caseating granuloma is seen, as soon as you hear the term, you should always in our setting think of tuberculosis. Very important question. Coming back, we had infections or infective causes of granuloma like TB, which was showing caseating much more commonly than non-caseating. Syphilis, where it's given the name of gamma. Leprosy, where there are multiple forms, some of which can show granulomas. Next we come to cat scratch disease. Very important and a recent favorite, cat scratch disease shows something known as a stellate granuloma. It shows something known as a stellate granuloma. Now first let's see what is a stellate granuloma. Stellate means star-shaped. So something to do with this particular shape we are going to see in that granuloma, because stellate means star-shaped. So a stellate granuloma appears like this. This particular granuloma that we are seeing, this particular shape that we are seeing over here, this is a star-shaped granuloma or a stellate granuloma. A recent favorite image with the examiners that we have now, stellate granuloma. So this is going to have necrosis. What are the components? It will have necrosis and it will have a lot of neutrophils, neutrophilic abscesses. Neutrophilic abscesses. So stellate granuloma will have necrosis and neutrophilic abscesses, and this, please remember, this is a classical spotter image that you need to remember for cat scratch disease. Is there any other disease in which a stellate granuloma can also be seen? So remember that a stellate granuloma can also be seen, the same granuloma can also be present in lymphogranuloma venereum. Lymphogranuloma venereum. LGV, that is very commonly as to how it is abbreviated. So for stellate granuloma, the primary disease that you need to remember, cat scratch. But any other disease, if the examiner is willing to ask, it will be lymphogranuloma venereum. Moving on to malaria, and I am going to add over here particularly talking about cerebral malaria. Cerebral malaria, I hope you know which is that malarial species or plasmodium species that causes cerebral malaria. It is P. falciparum. Plasmodium falciparum causes cerebral malaria. And what is the granuloma that you will see? So in the brain, we will see something known as a Dirk granuloma. Dirk granuloma is seen. Very important single line and image based question. Dirk granuloma is seen in, first you need to remember, utmost importance, malaria. But for better knowledge, remember cerebral malaria. And what image based question you must know for this is, if you see these two images, they are practically showing the same thing, only the staining is different. So the stain that has been used over here, as you can appreciate, pink and blue, becomes H and E stain. That is hematoxylin and eosin. Hematoxylin and eosin. So that will be pink and blue. And I want you to recall from the previous topics, hematoxylin gives the blue color, eosin gives the pink color. The other stain that has been shown, which the examiners tend to give more often, is the Fields stain. So these two particular stains are important, HNE and field stain, but they are showing the same thing. All these dots that you are seeing, that you can visualize as dots, these are nothing but organisms. So all these organisms have clogged the microvasculature or the blood vessel of the brain. So this particular appearance, whichever stain you are dealing with, this is known as the Dirk granuloma. This is known as the Dirk granuloma. Right? So Dirk granuloma, cerebral malaria, plasmodium falciparum. Good. So coming back now, we next have another fancy term, Q fever. And just as fancy as is the name of this fever, similarly the name of the granuloma is very fancy. This shows a fibrin ring granuloma. So now you would think, what is so fancy about it? Once you see the appearance of this granuloma, you will know this looks just like a donut. So they call it a donut granuloma. Donut granuloma or fibrin ring granuloma, they are the same thing seen in Q fever. And yes, the most recent favorite that you can say, which has started this year onwards only is this granuloma. Donut shaped, easiest to understand because just like a donut appears, just like you see a donut, similar shape is the shape of the granuloma. So this is going to have a central vacuole. Surrounding that, it is going to have a fibrin ring. That is why this is known as a fibrin ring granuloma. And students, remember, in pathology, a number of images or fancy terms will be related to food, and all those fancy food items are very important one-liner questions that you get. This is a one-liner question that has come in the previous years, but now whatever was coming earlier as a text-based question, now the examiners are giving more of images and video-based questions. So this image becomes important because earlier this was a theoretical question. Now we can expect an image on the same, that is a donut granuloma. Other name, fibrin ring granuloma. And which particular disease is this seen in? This will be seen in Q fever. Now these were the main granulomas in the infective etiologies that you had to know. Most important, please remember out of these: tuberculosis, caseating very commonly, the recent favorite Q fever, donut granuloma or fibrin ring granuloma, cerebral malaria showing Dirk granuloma, the two stains that we saw, HNE and field stains, and then we have cat scratch disease. Since the past 2-3 years, stellate granuloma is again becoming a top favorite with the examiners. So this was of the infective etiology. Going back to our classification, we also had a non-infective etiology of granulomas. So let's take that up separately. The first one that you need to know in this, under non-infective, the first one that you need to know is sarcoidosis. Now I want you to remember 2-3 very high yield points about sarcoidosis. This is going to show a granuloma, definitely, but this shows a characteristic non-caseating granuloma. It will not show caseous necrosis. Again, one of those twisted questions that we have. Can, in extremely rare circumstances, sarcoidosis show a caseating granuloma? Remember, yes, and that is why I took TB and sarcoidosis on the same line and on the same page, because remember, both TB and sarcoidosis can show caseating and non-caseating granulomas. But if you have to select the best answer that you have in the options, if all of these are separate options, in TB, remember, the more common will be caseating, but the reverse becomes for sarcoidosis. In sarcoidosis, the more common option will be non-caseating granuloma. For all practical purposes, non-caseating, but if the examiner wants to trick you and give you one of those rarest of rare questions, remember, rare cases can show caseous necrosis also. But for all practical purposes, remember, TB, caseating, sarcoidosis, non-caseating. What other than this do we need to know about sarcoidosis? Something that the students tend to miss out after reading about non-caseating. They tend to close this topic, but is very important. Sarcoidosis shows something known as a naked granuloma. Something known as a naked granuloma. If you remember the first diagram that we had drawn of a granuloma, you know the meaning of naked already. So I'll take you back to this diagram. What was right at the periphery or covering it like a collar? I told you to remember that word very carefully. It was of a lymphocyte, right? So the entire granuloma was covered with lymphocytes. That was a collar. That was like a collar or a protection or a clothing that was around that granuloma. If this piece of cloth is not present around the granuloma, if this clothing or this collar is not present around the granuloma, we will call it a naked granuloma. So remember, a naked granuloma is the one in which the lymphocytic collar is absent. the lymphocytic collar is absent, right? So sarcoidosis, two things, non-cageating granuloma, naked granuloma. Now let's take other examples for non-infective etiologies. The second example that we need to do under non-infective is something known as inflammatory bowel disease. Inflammatory bowel disease. Now remember, very commonly abbreviated as IBD. IBD. What you need to know at the outset is, before you will be discussing this in great detail under GI pathology, but for the time being, that basic concept you need to know is that inflammatory bowel disease is of two types. It is Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. Crohn's disease or CD, abbreviation very commonly used. Ulcerative colitis or UC, again commonly used with the examiners. They will not only ask you that does inflammatory bowel disease show granulomas, but they will ask you which type of inflammatory bowel disease shows granulomas. So remember, it is the Crohn's disease. Crohn's disease will show presence of granulomas. So granuloma will be present. Whereas ulcerative colitis will not show granuloma. Very important question of GI pathology that you cover up over here as your concept. Granulomas, Crohn's disease. Now, since we are discussing inflammatory bowel disease, let's finish off one more collateral question right over here. Out of these two, Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, which is the type of IBD or inflammatory bowel disease which has a more pre-malignant potential, that is, a potential to convert to cancer? So, this is more pre-malignant potential. Ulcerative colitis has a greater pre-malignant potential. So, two questions about IBD which I hope everyone can remember till we reach GI pathology. Which of the IBDs will show granulomas? And that will be Crohn's disease. Which IBD will have a greater pre-malignant potential? That will be ulcerative colitis. The last example in this non-infective category that we have, the third one, is vasculitis. Now students, remember, itis, I hope you can recall, inflammation. Vasculitis, inflammation of the vessel. There are certain vasculitis that can show granulomas. What are those examples that you need to recall or remember? These include temporal arteritis. These include Takayasu arteritis. Next, it includes Wegener's granulomatosis. Wegener's granulomatosis. And it also includes Churg-Strauss syndrome. Churg-Strauss syndrome. Now, there are one or two important things that you need to know. Wegener's granulomatosis, it has the term granulomatosis, so you can blindly mark the option that in the term there is granulomatosis, obviously it will show a granuloma. But the recent edition of Robbins has changed the terminology, and Wegener's granulomatosis is now, the new name for Wegener's granulomatosis is, thankfully they've retained the granulomatosis, so we will remember it shows granuloma. Granulomatosis with polyangiitis. That is the new name. So maybe in the options, the examiner will give you this, more chances in fact, is that the examiner will give you this recent new name, granulomatosis with polyangiitis. That is nothing but Wegener's granulomatosis. Lastly, I told you about Churg-Strauss syndrome. This shows a special type of granuloma that is known as the eosinophilic granuloma. That is the eosinophilic granuloma. Because Churg-Strauss syndrome, remember this is also a type of vasculitis that we will be dealing with eventually. This shows more of eosinophils. So the granuloma becomes an eosinophilic granuloma. So students, it was infective and non-infective. For infective, I told you to remember the most common disease in our setting, that was tuberculosis, cageating granuloma more commonly, Q fever showing donut granuloma, malaria or cerebral malaria showing Dirk granuloma, cat scratch disease and LGV showing stellate granuloma. Coming to the non-infective etiology, sarcoidosis showing two very important things, that is non-cageating granuloma and a naked granuloma. Inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's disease particularly shows granulomas. And lastly, we had vasculitis, in which the most important example was Wegener's granulomatosis. Why? Because now the term has also changed, granulomatosis with polyangiitis, and Churg-Strauss syndrome shows eosinophilic granuloma. The last set of MCQs which will completely finish this topic for us, so put them up in the end, very important for you to memorize. These are one-liner questions that are based on the granulomas. Question number 1. Which is the most important cell? Which is the most important cell in a granuloma? Now, a similar question we had done when we were doing chronic inflammation. What was the most important cell of chronic inflammation? It was macrophage. Over here, the examiner is asking you particularly for a granuloma. So remember, this is also a macrophage, but a modified macrophage. And what was the modified macrophage? Correct, epithelioid cell. So the answer to this will be epithelioid cell. The most important cell will be the epithelioid cell, which is nothing but a modified macrophage. The next question that you need to know. Remember all the granulomas that we were talking about, I said many of them have a lymphocytic collar around them. So which type of lymphocytes are those? Type of lymphocytes. When we discuss further our concept of immunology and we come to the chapter of immunity, we will know that lymphocytes can be B lymphocytes, T lymphocytes and so on. What you need to know is the lymphocytes that you particularly see in a granuloma that are forming that collar. These are the CD4 type of T helper cell 1. CD4 type of T cells, and which category? T helper cell type 1. Very important. So the most important cell was an epithelioid cell. The lymphocytes are CD4 type of T helper cell category 1. And the last question which will finish this topic for us, a question that you already know. So this is like a summary or this is like a revision to your previous lecture of cytokines. What is the cytokine? What is the cytokine responsible for granuloma formation? And we've done this earlier for granuloma formation. We have done this earlier in our discussion on cytokines. And how we remembered? It was interferon gamma. And that is how we had remembered that G for gamma and G for granuloma. If you can recall, interferons were of three types: alpha, beta and gamma. Interferon alpha had antiviral properties, A for alpha, A for antiviral. Interferon beta, so we remembered B for beta, B for brain, so this is used for multiple sclerosis treatment. And interferon gamma, we had done G for gamma and G for granuloma. So this is the most important cytokine that is responsible for granuloma formation. So students, this was all about chronic inflammation, And the subtype of chronic inflammation, which is a very high yielding topic in all the major exams that you will appear for, that is granulomatous inflammation. Not only do you need to have a strong theoretical base, but now with a recent change in the trend towards image-based questions, these form one of the most high-yield topics in general pathology, from which the examiners tend to give more of image-based questions.